This is the first Principal Investigators Academy in person this year. We're going to get back actually to our, cadence of once a quarter. And what we're planning for after the first of the year is to have a couple of industry physicians who are in charge of clinical trials come and say what they're looking for in a site, why they select a site, and what they expect of principal investigators, which will be really fun. And we'll see if they all have the same answers. So anyway, Dr. Marsh is here, and he has just been an unfailing supportive of the CTSI, of the Clinical Trials Center of Excellence, of clinical trials in general, and he's going to make a few comments.
Thank you.
So good evening.
Good evening.
Oh, come on. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, so it's great to be here with you guys. Wes, when I came in, says, "Where's your boss?" And I said, "Well, Gordon." He goes, "No, Sally." So it's
You're
yeah.
welcome.
So it is really so great to be here with you guys, and thank you for all you do for the CTSI group, for the mentors, and I'm just so delighted that this program, which really raises our younger investigators, and by doing that really raises our whole organization, is the best statement about how we are investing in the future of WVU, and we're investing in the future of biomedical sciences. So being an older person, I'm counting on you guys figuring things out really quickly and opening up trials to people like me who will need that in the not too distant future. But being part of a university and doing discovery-based research is one of the most fun paths you can take. And I think that there is a requisite skill set that allows you to do things, but really the joy is solving problems and contributing to the good of people, not only in West Virginia first, but eventually people everywhere. So thank you for all you do. Sally, thank you for your incredible leadership. Dan, thank you for visiting today, and congratulations, everybody. Now, can I start the slide deck, please? I have no slides.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't thank the CTSI staff, and I particularly want to thank Debbie Lee, who's sitting down back there. She is tireless. These things would never go on without her, but there's others around here that I could say the same. I think clinical trials are critically important for places like West Virginia. We all know the horrendous health outcomes here. It's the bottom of the nation. And, this place, Shelley showed a slide today, clinical trials are increasing, the interest among investigators are increasing. And I am so delighted tonight to introduce our guest speaker, because I think he really brings opportunities that have not been here in the past. Dr. Hanley is really a leading expert on brain injury. I could hardly get him out of R&I today. In fact, he went back for a second visit. And he was the principal investigator for the NIH-sponsored MISTY-3 and CLEAR-3 trials investigating minimally invasive neurosurgical techniques to treat hemorrhagic stroke. Dr. Hanley's 40 years in medicine, it's always wonderful to have somebody who's your vintage, have centered on areas of clinical trial design, organization, and interpretation of drug and device trials, development of strategic research plans, and FDA regulatory compliance. A professor of neurology, neurosurgery, and anesthesia critical care medicine at Johns Hopkins University since 1996, he founded the Division of Brain Injury Outcomes, now known as BIOS Clinical Trials Coordinating Center, in 1999. Its focus is to provide multi-center management to clinical trials evaluating therapeutic, preventive, and diagnostic interventions. As the principal investigator for the Center for Advancing Translational Science, that's the NCATS-funded Johns Hopkins University Trial Innovation Center, Dr. Hanley leads collaborative efforts to advance education and therapeutics via well-designed and innovative CTSA trials. And what's really, I think, impressive about him is he called me, emailed me, and me and emailed me once or twice or a couple times, and talked to me and said, I saw about the Principal Investigators Academy, we're writing this grant, and I wonder if you'd be a consultant. And I was really touched because I think a lot of folks, that we know would have just taken the Principal Investigators Academy and ran. But, I think he's also interested in rural health and in really, sort of facilitating and enabling places that can really make a difference. So I am delighted to welcome, he's going to talk to us about what is the Trials Innovation Center and how can ID investigators at WVU and our iScore sites access their services. So Dan, welcome.
Thank you for that long but nice introduction. I do want to confirm that I met Sally over the internet in what is a research dating service. And, I couldn't feel luckier. And everything that I read when I read about the Investigator Training Academy has several 100% more than met my expectations. Clay asked me what was my visit like, and I said, you have a wonderful place and environment here, but more than anything else, you have wonderful people who are informed, thoughtful, and using their skills to make things better. And we really depend on research, and particularly randomized research, to know where to go and where not to go in all fields of medicine and in many in life. But it isn't the trials, it's the people that make them, which is why I wanted to come here to meet you. And you're very lucky to have each other. I can do it with this. Okay. Pretty good for a neurologist. I passed the intelligence test pretty quickly. So these are some disclosures. I'm not going to talk about my work tonight, but I spent 20 years telling people something that is contraindicated on the label for TPA might be good. The first 10 years of my presentations were, you want to do what? I'm, for better or worse, a lifer at Hopkins. So my life has been built on NIH funds. So although there are flaws in every marriage, you won't hear me say anything bad about NIH, but also FDA funds and FDA problems. I've worked on all three sides as applicant, as a grant receiver, and as an external consultant. I've worked for pharma. I've worked for 10 years, not as many as Sally, and not as big an operation, but 10 years supervising device trials for a Boston cardiac device public company. And I've served on a number of boards, and like Sally, I don't do anything, but Karen Lane, Nicole, Lindsay, Andrew, and many others are in large part responsible for the story I'll tell you. So a quick overview of the environment. And I'm using this abbreviation, M for multi-site, little m, randomized controlled trials. which we rely on. Evidence-based medicine isn't perfect. You shouldn't always use it. Sometimes your judgment needs to overrule the evidence, but it's the best data we have. And it forms the backbone of guidelines, which not only do we read, but people who consume our services read. So it's important that those data that go into multi-site randomized clinical trials have some form of precision. And I'm partially here today because of this Trial Innovation Network, which was generated in large part by external oversight of our business. The accounting office asked NIH, why do you have so many $1 billion in your budget that's unexpended, but been allocated for several years? And they said, well, everybody knows. It's because clinical trials aren't on time and the IRB delays everything, which, if you'll excuse the aphorism, is what us boys tell the girls all the time. Just find the cheapest excuse and lay it out there until somebody questions the validity of it. And it turns out it wasn't the IRB. The problem is often us and how we organize ourselves and how we explain ourselves to others. Francis Collins had to do something. This is from his JAMA open source editorial about he was going to re-engineer the clinical enterprise of clinical trials. You see back here, and this is 2015, we're at whatever it was, 42 billion now in NIH budget. And clinical trials are between 5 and 10%. So you think of clinical trials because they're big ticket items, but they're a small proportion of the NIH budget. So they put in place a series of things to help, they thought, improve clinical trials. This is the figure from that editorial. It's a little bit unusual to have an editorial with a figure, but in the sequence from idea to results, which I'll show you some other slides and schemas of, more GCP training. You could only do you couldn't have an investigator-initiated clinical trial anymore. It has to match an RFA that matches a mission on the IC, which I think is reasonable discipline up to a point. They said we're going to have SIRBs. We actually built in the tin protocol template that's based on the FDA template as a standard template. And they upped the clinicaltrials.gov registration and the submission requirements. So if you move outside of NIH, which I think is a good thing to do, and you only have to count dollars to realize there may be more to learn about clinical trials from industry than there is in NIH. And you're very lucky to have Sally here, who's worked in both worlds. Although I didn't do it in as purposeful a way as Sally, I feel lucky that I've been able to work in both worlds. There's the budget through 2019, pre-COVID. These are pharma slides. So the reference is down in the lower right corner. And these slides are available to you afterwards if you want any of them. You can see that spending and the bottom yellow bars are approvals. There's not a direct correlation. And even worse, the little uptick between 2012 and 2019, most of that uptick is all biologics. It's not drugs. So it's opening up of really a new area of therapeutics. So pharma's not happy with clinical trials either. And this would certainly be a call for either better clinical trials or more efficient ones, or maybe both. So here's a survey of patients and general public who are our target audience for clinical trials and the target audience for results. This was done out of the Tufts clinical trials, commercial clinical trials oversight center. A reasonable sample, men and women. 20% had participated in research and they thought it was very important, but 60% aren't able to name a place where they would go for a clinical trial. 90% believe that research is generally safe, but the majority rarely discuss research with their physician, even though they're usually seeking the physician's advice for a condition. And previous research participants, and this is where some of your program, the Maverick program, and all the other parts of your outreach that are perhaps less famous but more important, 50% are saying that it disrupted their routine. And this is pre-COVID. And this is pre another half generation of people who don't want their routine interrupted at all. So there's some issues with performance here. And here's another one. How many people have done all of their city courses in this room?
The ones were required.
There you go. You got a condition. Right. Only a couple people who work for Sally. I am not one of those people. Okay. More regulations, many of which are well-intentioned by corporate safety officers to educate us, perhaps some of them about things that we where just good judgment might be enough. But I understand fiduciary responsibility and the transfer of responsibility to employees. And the same thing is happening in clinical trials. More tasks, more frequent tasks, greater work effort per task because of the complexity, execution burden, and look at payment. All right? It's the same world we're living in. So, and flat trial funding dollars, and we're now in another flat overall funding dollars, which means flat. So NCATS, which is a center, not an institute, but it's a large center. It decided that it should do something about trial performance, and the Trial Innovation Network was their particular solution. There's now the general medicine has developed the I-SCORE-R grant, which you have, and you should be very proud of having that. And we're happy to share our first 7 years experience with you to help you perform better on that grant, or to look at our failures and realize maybe where you don't want to expend effort. The idea is really simple. The input is early stage protocols, a group of multi-institution group, cross-institution group, so that we get out of the institutional barrier problem, takes an idea and tries to help make a more robust trial. And we either do it in a simple consult or a more complicated consult, and I'll tell you about both. So what's in it for us? Our interest was in improving operational performance, and we look for collaborators, so the bottom 3 boxes, where people will let us be the DCC or part of the DCC, So we can have the metadata from the execution of the trial to query over what our performance is. And so that we can put into it innovations into the trial and test whether some of the components of performance can be altered. This is an overview that we used of what are the goals of the network. I'm sorry that the top stuff is blocking the slide here. But we've focused on both innovation, operational excellence, and finding collaboration. There we go.
I
Yeah,
told
that-
you we couldn't exist without him.
So better, faster, more cost efficient, so we could do more. And becoming a laboratory to share evidence about those innovations. And, you know, we started out, we had to implement SIRB and help share how to do that. Some master agreements, which work okay, but not great. Same thing for SIRB. You still have to have a strategy to navigate them. And then improving recruitment, engagement. And we've added to that a precision of your intervention and quality of your data collection into our goals. Now, in the second 10, we're seeking much broader collaboration with a lot of different parties, including some of the parties that General Medicine, your sponsors. I think having good trials in rural areas is a good idea. Okay. Now we're not moving anymore. Maybe this will move it. Nope.
Didn't touch.
I can do that. Yeah, I tried that. So this is a complicated slide, a lot of data. It's Courtney, right? From the Cancer Institute?
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
right. This is like a molecular biology slide for trials. Okay, shove as much data in there and confuse the hell out of it. A wheel to show that we're diagnostically agnostic in terms of the targets, except cancer's got its own very good program that actually works, much of which some of our mitigations are modeled on. And we do have a small number of oncology trials, but over the first 7 years, there were 400 requested consults. I think the final number was 411, 76 therapeutic areas, and 94% of the CTSAs played, although some of the big ones and some of the small ones were less interested for obvious and unobvious reasons. And a lot of different institutes were the target. And you see on the right-hand side, we ended up with 37 funded trials and a lot of different areas that people requested help in. That's the CTSA network. Maybe the bottom left is what's important here. HLT is this hub CTSA liaison team who work in the way that your CTSI works to match investigators with funding sources and to help them organize themselves. And they were the door for these consults. The only requirement was that you be proposing a multi-site clinical trial and you give us a brief description. These are another wheel of both funding sources and therapeutic areas for what were the comprehensive consults. And I'll walk you through this in a second, but we spend about 4 to 6 hours with someone who wants to do a trial and go over an area of questions. I'll show you a bit about that in a second. And then you might choose to want to put in a proposal with us. And if you do, we will continue to help you over a 4 to 6 month period to get the proposal into shape. This is our current structure, with Vanderbilt being a TIC, Trial Innovation Center, Hopkins being one, and Vanderbilt being the Recruitment Innovation Center. This is the process, and if you go from the top, TIN 1.0, the first 7 years, you put in an application. We called you up within 5 days of your application coming up on our website, and we scheduled an initial meeting to talk to you about your problem and what areas you thought you needed help in. That didn't always correlate to the end condition after a 4-hour conversation. And people often asked for more help in other areas they hadn't thought about after a little Q&A discussion. A number, and I'll show you, because I'm a trialist, I'll show you a consort diagram of screening to funding in a sec, but a bunch of them, about 30% went on to this comprehensive thing. And then almost all of those, 95% went on to cooperative proposal writing and review and re-review and sometimes re-review. And then, the last step is starting the grant. And we focused a lot of our operational energy on startup, because if you go back to the fundamental proposition that trials were taking too long, it took us a year in our regionally famous to neurosurgeons MISTY trial to get all the contracting done and get the sites up and running. And we put together the hypothesis that it should take no more than 90 days. And we actually showed a way to do that. We showed that we could do it in trials. And in a 5-year study, the difference between 365 and 90 days is almost 15% of recruitment time. So think of giving yourself that kind of advantage in a foot race. So the consultation process starts out with this 2 to 4 hour define what you think your RCT should look like. What's the RFA? Who's the IC? Find out about whether you need to build a consortium or not. We found a lot of synergy with people who wanted to build a consortium because there wasn't a trial in the area they wanted to undertake. And then in the comprehensive, really dig into the protocol and the analysis part, and provide some guidance for mistakes made previously and mistakes to avoid. And then a lot of work with peer review. And then finally, setting up a reasonable UG3 period, because not only the response to the GOA has been to do fewer trials, and just to be straightforward about what our NIH is doing, that's been their fundamental risk-averse response. And the second is to almost always use the UG3, UH3 mechanism in which they can bail after a year and won't have a large unobligated budget. So in TIN 2.0, in the red box, we want to find pathways to share what we've done so far and to develop better solutions, because our solutions are incomplete. And I won't read all the different areas, but we're looking at you as the main partner to help us define what we can share, know better what we can share, and to help us start sharing in the environments you know best that we don't know enough about. Here's a flow diagram for what a consult looks like. And Sally in her office will be able to access the starting point for you. And you'll get assigned to either Hopkins or Vanderbilt TIC, and the RIC will come to all of them. If you want a recruitment only consult, you can get that. And the TICs will listen in. Because again, sometimes what people thought they wanted and what they needed were different. And you can see some of the things that we talk about in the initial consult. We try to get that done in 30 days. Lots of times where an investigator is a busy clinician, it can take 90, but we got them done in 90 days. And then we take going forward to the entire group of the Trial Innovation Network and say, this is an interesting problem. This is why it's interesting. These are some innovations we can do. And these are some of the unmet needs. And do you as a group agree with us going forward in a partnership? And it's put to a vote. And all the members of the TIN vote. And then we go forward. Plenty of times people say, you check my ideas, I just want to submit the grant here at my institution. And that's a good ending too. And a third group of people are, you know, I really need to go back and collect some more data and rethink my hypothesis. All of those are good endings. It's particularly good ending if you don't waste your time and energy and that of others on putting in something that is probably not going to get funded. We are not perfect at figuring that out, just to be clear. And there are certainly situations where the investigator knows best, and things that we think aren't well conceived, others think are. So here's the consort diagram. And it's how I spent the last 7 years of my life. Sally has done 49 risk reviews, I learned today, for the CTSI. And I've done 113 initial consultations. I actually did slightly more than our share in the network. 37 were approved for comprehensive consultations. No one who we asked to be approved for comprehensive was not approved. And essentially, up till now, there's been enough capacity. We haven't not approved anything. And for a free resource, we still think it's underutilized, which is one of the reasons I came to Sally, to find more folks who want to use it. We ended up with 16 successful trials to implement. 4 were in a pilot phase that didn't go through every stage of the process, and 12 did. And we have another 14 that are still in various study sections in NIH. A number of the initial consults that didn't go forward still put applications in and took recruitment or SIRB services from us. There are now other places where you can get those services, but we still have some good services in those areas. Here's the timeline of the TIN and what we did. Those are all the trials. I think there are 12 there. I don't know which 2 I didn't put in, but what I want you to see is the cross-institutional partnership in blue. For the 2 that say JH, there were 20, the 2 COVID trials, CSSC 01 and 04. There were 20 TIN sites in those trials and 10 non-TIN sites. So they are among all of these one of the most complete partnerships, and we used every bit of the network consortium machinery we built to do those trials. They both were done in a year. And it was 15 months from inception to changing an FDA EUA with the second of those two trials. So these are those 4 stages. In the consult, we decide whether we and the consultee want to build a partnership. And we confirm that in the comprehensive phase. We make a team plan in the grant production phase. And then we help with operations, including some of our startup tools and other precision tools. These are some of the areas where my group has significant experience and accomplishments. We use there were not the cohort building resources that currently exist when we started this. So we built our own that was network specific, and it's an expression of interest process in which we do electronic health record cohort assessment that's based on whatever you use. So you could use Trinetics, and we are increasingly using Trinetics just to confirm your decision that that's a good platform. And we do a presentation about the trial to PIs at all of the CTSA sites, and we could include IdeaNet sites in those presentations going forward. That group gets not enough in my mind, but they get to review the protocol for budget and clinical feasibility. We should probably be doing more of that. We're starting to look at racial and ethnic subgroups in our cohort assessments because people are looking at it in our trials. And it's a pretty good system, and it works quickly in the first couple months after you put a consult in. The EHR doesn't tell you what recruitment's going to be like, but it tells you what your challenges are going to be and where there may be sufficient patients. And this is from the RIC. What they do, and this is a simple picture of it, is assess the recruitment and retention barriers, ask questions about the participant experience. Working with us, we've developed some site selection processes and have some metrics which we now are beginning to have enough data and trials to start to test. And they've bought into our Kool-Aid on that one. And they now list it as part of their process, which is a good form of flattery. You know, they encourage everybody to think about engaging the stakeholders throughout the whole trial. Here's a process from beginning to end that Terry Edwards, who helps organize both the RIC and the TIC at Vanderbilt, put forth in terms of what the experience is. Study optimization, refining the design, cohort discovery, expression of interest to other PIs. We'll do a consult with the SIRB before you have to put the thing in if you want to understand those barriers. They'll develop a recruitment and retention plan, which you can use in your submission. They have community engagement and outreach capabilities, but I know you have them as well, and I hear about them. And then bringing consents to patients with e-consent, which we all learned to do in the COVID pandemic. And they and many others, including we, have plenty of patient-facing apps and tools to make the patient a full contributor to the trial. So that's the short version of the story. At the end of this are another 15 or 20 slides that go over the process in a bit more detail. But I thought now was a good place to stop and answer your questions.
That's great, thank you. Out of each of the tables, though, I think we have a lot of big mouths in here, so everybody could hear and hear.
It's looking right at me for some reason.
I wonder why. Questions? I have a question while these guys are thinking. You mentioned that there was increasing efficiency of contracting. What are some of the strategies that do that? Because as you know, that is a big bottleneck everywhere, particularly right now at WVU.
In some of our trials, my trials before Misty sometimes took 2 years to get up and running. At the venerable Johns Hopkins University,
Mhm.
Where I was thought we have a solution for everything. And I asked one of our administrators, you know, how come the trials contracts aren't going so fast? And she said, I'll look into it. And they started to move a little faster. And you know, I knew the people called, and I called them, and it would move very faster. And she developed a system. This is a trade secret. I should not be
Oh,
telling
no, I
you.
wouldn't.
He developed a system in which he would go over to the Office of Research at noontime, when all the contract people were out getting their sandwich
Mhm.
or taking a walk. And she would go through, this is when they were dealing with paper. He would go through the pile of contracts that were on his desk, take mine, put them on top. So you knew there was a problem.
Yeah, right.
So now to your answer. We don't always do things the same way in Kent. And that's one of the reasons to invite you and others to come in and to both let you enjoy the pain and maybe share some solutions. I'm sorry. Vanderbilt sometimes thinks that a standard form is enough. And we communicated a master template. We made sure that every consortium had that master template. Hopkins chose not to use it most of the time.
Oh.
Okay. We've done 10 or 11 UG3s now, and we've never missed a milestone. Yeah, and they've all transferred to UH3. And what we found is that our startup curriculum has in it a component where we do weekly oversight with each site, and we give them tasks to do, and they're just-in-time tasks. And we have dates and times based on both our experience and the Tufts Pharmaceutical polling units experience for contracting times. And when people are outside of those times, we tell them, but we give them an expectation to be inside and reminders. And where we've often failed has been when we haven't used that oversight. And I can tell you we just started up 40 of the 80 sites in this React AF Apple Watch study. They were on time, but the thing that was most at risk was contracting. And it's also the thing with greatest variability. And part of it is in local education, where the site coordinator has been told, we don't do contracting until X. And X is often both an approved budget by a finance person locally and local IAB approval despite the fact that they have ceded IRB approval
Mhm.
to the SIRB. And many institutions are still doing parallel approval.
Mhm.
And that's not wrong.
Mhm.
Institutions have fiduciary responsibility that may or may not be well taken care of by other institutions. Hopkins tries very hard to do that. We don't always succeed, but we're good at it. And local institutions are governed by local law that they often know better than people who aren't in their state. So contracting has the greatest variance. And the best we can do is oversight with a startup manager who is also a problem-solving coach for the coordinator at each of the sites.
Oh.
And we've simplified the curriculum to a just-in-time curriculum.
Are there other questions? Yeah, Joe.
Does the network help the investigators develop their relationships with the funders at NIH? Because that's another piece of the whole process.
Yes.
How do you go back to that? I mean, do you get a cattle product?
There's a lot of coaching and helping an investigator explain their ideas to others and write a good grant.
Right.
There's a lot of coaching that goes on in getting an investigator to listen to a program officer and to follow instructions. And there's some coaching to help an investigator realize that the program officer may be serving their personal needs or their institute's current fiscal year policies, and they have to develop some thick advocacy skin. So there's a lot of mentoring that goes on there, is the short answer.
Makes sense.
You know, the program officers, there are two kinds of program officers. One type is more rare than the other. I won't be convicted of making a bad statement about NIH, but there are good and bad. And all program officers have the job of recruiting applications. Not all program officers take on a role of advocacy for ideas, not individuals, but ideas. And some of the coaching is to help people learn to be advocates for ideas. And, you know, to the degree that that idea is unique and associated with an individual, that's a good thing. And you may get your grant funded. But, you know, asking questions is what's really important.
Other questions?
That's just real specific. What?
The more specific, the better.
What platform do you use for e-consent?
We are currently using a DocuSign platform that was adapted to Hopkins' needs. We are not using the Advero one. And we allow each site to follow their local standards. We're beginning to work in one of the 14 trials is a trial that I'm doing with Linda Van Eldick from the Kentucky CTSA. And she's the director of their Alzheimer's Center and director of the Colonel Sanders Fried Chicken Alzheimer's Center. Right. And it's a time-limited exposure to an anti-inflammatory and brain hemorrhage. So we have lots of consent issues. And figuring out how to make consent work in an under-resourced environment. I mean, we had a problem in Yale, New Haven, where the mother was in the ICU The son was the only identifiable relative. He knew that she was safe and stable, and he was at work, and he didn't have access to a computer. So how is he going to solve the e-consent problem? So we're beginning to work on some processes that help site coordinators. And you got some site coordinators that want to take on that burden to get this family into this study that they want to be in, and there are some that don't. And during COVID, we had a guy who would get into a cab and bring the consent to the patient's family member. But you don't find that every time.
Out to the parking lot, meet him in the parking lot.
Yep. A number of things like that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I actually sort of have two questions. Sorry, I lost. It's kind of two-part because I've been at West Virginia University for quite a while. And the projects that we've pushed forward and then I've assisted with pushing forward in terms of grants. Sometimes I get the notice right brushed up against a due date of sorts. And how does your guidance workflow work in that just in time on the front end? That's part one. Part two is if there are submissions that are already in the system but may accidentally get funded, is there drop-in type coaching structure for those that have accidentally somehow gone?
No, not accidentally. You got it through merit and making a good argument.
Well, but then the tough work really begins the next day from that moment.
Yeah.
In all my experiences, is hitting the ground running because now we're live. We're good to go. We have to go now. It's go time.
So the short answer to the second one is yes. We do a number of those. One of those 14 was was both a comprehensive consult and then some execution was one of those situations. And we welcome others. And the first question is about short deadlines. We can't work magic,
Right.
and we can't fix problems that we don't understand and we haven't had time to understand. But we do have templated materials, and if you come to us within 30 days for sure, we've facilitated multiple 15-day turnarounds. We'll give people letters of support and give people access to tools that we have and describe that we've done.
Mhm.
And that's called utilizing a resource.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Well, thank you very much, particularly is the fact that we were all eating and you weren't, so. So thanks again.
You did give me my Miranda rights about eating late.
Right. Debbie, did you have any comments?
Yes.
Of course. Well, of course.
I hate to be in the front of the room, you know how I am.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Can I sit down, Debbie?
Yeah.
yes, go for it.
No, those were, yeah.
Okay. So for those of us in the room, for those on Zoom, shut your ears for a second. Please go over and pick up cheesecake with seasonal berries. While you're over there, we would love for you to give us feedback about tonight. And yes, there's two different ways for those of us that might be a little bit more old school. There's pen and paper, or if there's also a QR code, you can also do it on your phone. For those on Zoom, don't worry, you'll be getting an email from me to also provide us feedback as well. So please do that. There was a question in the room, and I think it was Kim who said, what if I get thrown into something and I'm unable, it's a quick thing, it's a quick turnaround time. Is there a way for us to get guidance, right? Well, it's funny that you should ask that, Kim, because we also have that here as well. We have just started our expert office hours, which is real-time advice, where investigators can bring their research questions, design, planning, implementation happens on Wednesdays from 5 to 6, except holiday weeks. So don't call in on those Wednesdays, or you might just get Debbie joining and saying, hey, we're not doing it today. So, but it is no RSVP. Please just join. If you don't have this, you can definitely come to me afterwards, email me, and I can get that to you.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I'm
just,
sure, yep.
so
Dr. Feinberg, she's of the same vintage as myself, and Dr. Hanley, has been in clinical trials for 30 years, is going to be the consultant. I don't want her sitting there just, sort of doing computer games or something. So please drop in. Because, I think that the idea labs are good, but then there needs to be a follow-up. And that's what we're really sort of trying to do. And the other thing is, if there are problems in clinical trial, well, there are problems every day in clinical trials, but if you want sort of an opinion or something from somebody who's been in clinical trials for 30 years, I think this is a good way to go. So we're really sort of looking forward to that. The other thing, I just stepped over and said, Shelley, is it okay if I use your name here? If any of you have questions, or your investigators, I mean, some of you are here from groups and a lot of your investigators aren't. Shelley is going to be the point person, and she and I and others will sort of sort them out with Dr. Hanley, but do not, hesitate if you have questions, access, whatever regarding sort of the tick. Shelley's going to be the point person, and everybody knows Shelley. So, okay, with that, please.
To get on the phone and just talk.
Yeah, no, that's great.
No.
That's great.
Sally has my phone number.
I do.
Texting frequently.
Only when he texted me after, me. I mean, I just get busy, and I completely forgot about the Zoom. And then I got a text from you. It's like, hey, weren't we supposed to talk? And then I didn't respond, and he called me. So anyway, so listen, folks, help yourself to cheesecake, and thank you so much for coming.